Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host Benjamin Lee, and welcome aboard the Eastern Express. Now, what do you do when your enemy keeps bombing your weapon factories? Well, you pack up, move abroad, and build new ones with your allies. Ukraine's defense industry is past the stage of survival. Now it's all about scaling up, innovating, and turning the war into the world's most high-tech live-fire testing ground. From Danish cruise missiles to Taiwanese drones, Ukraine is opening up its doors and its battlefields to international partners. And the results could redefine modern warfare. On this episode, we're looking at how Ukraine is rewriting the rules of defense production. So, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Europe has announced its biggest single investment yet in Ukraine's rapidly expanding drone industry. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen unveiled the plan in her annual State of the European Union address.
That Europe will front-load 6 billion euros from the air alone and enter into a drone alliance with Ukraine. Ukraine has the ingenuity. What it needs now is scale.
The funding is designed to help Kyiv scale up production of its now world-renowned drone arsenal. Ukrainian drones, cheap, versatile and locally manufactured, have become one of the defining weapons of the war. European governments have certainly awoken to the importance of drones as well as anti-drone systems following a series of incursions into their airspaces. Ukraine's experience could help in that.
Defense against drones has previously mainly focused on internal security, maybe organized crime and other starting points. If we start building a drone wall at the EU level, it's a question of military defense. It's a different level of thing as we saw in Poland.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has said Ukraine could produce up to 8 million drones a year, but lacks the money to achieve that scale. Drones are already responsible for 23% of Russian equipment losses, and Ukrainian commanders say as much as 70% of all battlefield hits now come from unmanned systems.
And now, let's zone in on the east-planning portion of our show. Drones have been one of the most significant introductions to modern warfare. Though the technology has been in use for a long time, the ever-presence of them in the current war in Ukraine has truly changed the way we see conflicts.
When people hear drones, they often imagine either the large satellite-guided aircraft used by NATO or a toy-like camera with propellers. Ukraine's war for survival has, however, been transformed by first-person view drones, or FPVs. These are essentially hobbyist racing drones, retrofitted with explosives and flown by operators wearing video goggles. They are cheap, nimble, and deadly accurate, able to hit tanks, artillery, or even individual soldiers. Crucially, they cost a fraction of the systems they destroy, sometimes only a few $100s, to take out a multi-million-dollar target. FPVs have given smaller frontline units unprecedented strike power, letting them harass Russian troops from a distance and compensate for shortages in traditional artillery. And with proper resources, Ukraine could move from a budding market for drones toward mass production. And in modern warfare, quantity can be just as decisive as quality.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. For over 3 years, Russia has bombed, shelled, and targeted Ukrainian factories. The Kremlin strategy was simple: destroy Ukraine's ability to produce weapons at home and force Kyiv to depend entirely on outside supplies. But Ukraine has flipped the script. So instead of becoming dependent, it's turning its defense industry into a global network. This shift started with a simple recognition: the war will not be decided by imported stockpiles alone. Western aid matters, but it comes with delays, restrictions, and political drama. So, Ukraine is betting on partnerships, creating joint ventures, relocating production abroad, and building a pipeline of innovation that Russia cannot bomb out of existence. Take Denmark. Earlier this month, Ukrainian defense company Firepoint announced that it would open a production line just next to a Danish airspace. Firepoint makes long-range strike drones and cruise missiles capable of hitting Russian military sites deep inside occupied territory and even across the border. This is the first time Ukraine has moved part of its defense production outside of the country. Danish officials hinted the facility may focus on producing fuel for long-range missiles, with operations expected to start in December. But Denmark is just the beginning. Latvia and Lithuania are preparing similar projects. Germany's Rheinmetall and Turkey's Baykar are already working on joint ventures with Kyiv. And just weeks ago, Ukraine signed a memorandum with Poland and Taiwan to cooperate on drone production. Even the Philippines is exploring a partnership on naval drones. The broad geopolitical range is determined by security. By diversifying production across borders, Ukraine creates resilience. If Russia destroys one facility, others can keep the supply chain running. It also brings in foreign expertise, foreign capital, and foreign markets. And naturally, Western companies seize an opportunity here as well. Ukraine's battlefields are the ultimate testing lab. New drones, new robots, new electronic warfare systems. Kyiv has launched a program literally called Test in Ukraine, offering manufacturers a chance to put their technology through the harshest real-world conditions. As Alexis Grinkiewicz, Supreme Allied Commander Europe, puts it recently, find yourself a Ukrainian partner and bring your best gear. Not only do they gain a stake in Ukraine's defense, they gain data, field results, and a chance to shape their weapons of tomorrow. By building its own capacity and linking it to partners abroad, Kyiv gains a buffer against uncertainty. This war has already been called the first great drone war, but if Ukraine's strategy succeeds, it may also be remembered as a war that transformed defense production itself, from national silos into international ecosystems. In the long run, that could reshape not only how wars are fought, but how nations prepare for them.
Today on Eastern Express, we're at the Warsaw Security Forum 2025, and joining me now is General Philip Breedlove, the former Supreme Allied Commander of forces here in Europe. Thank you, sir, so much for joining us here on TV.
Good to be back.
Yes, now, your time as Supreme Allied Commander here in Europe, you saw the annexation of Crimea. You saw the very beginnings of this war that we're seeing drag on and intensify, of course, over the past 3.5 years. Now, Ukraine has moved from not having any weapons to receiving weapons from the West, and now co-producing them with some international partners. From your perspective, how transformational is this shift for Ukraine's long-term defense independence?
Well, it's a really good question, and there's really sort of two answers. For Ukraine, the idea that it's now beginning to build the kind of weapons it needs to strike back at Russia is incredibly important, because as you know, we've had a policy limitation on Ukraine for a long time, not allowing them to use Western weapons to strike into Russia, which I think is not a good policy. But so for Ukraine to be able to develop its own, it's really important. Also for the rest of the world. I mean, my country is now looking to Ukraine to help shape our drone industry and our drone capabilities. And so for Ukraine to be able to sort of, in a wartime environment, create capabilities that the rest of the world can benefit from is really important.
Are you surprised to see the evolution of drone warfare as such as what we see in Ukraine, as quick and...
No, I'm not surprised at all. You know, not to get off subject, but this will be important. Russia's Air Force has failed it in a Western sense. They haven't established air superiority over the battlefield, and they haven't been able to really impose their self on Ukraine. So Russia has its own drone industry has taken off, and so this has driven sort of an arms race in drones between the two. And that has driven some pretty incredible innovation that we in the West, at least we in the United States, are agreeing we don't need to start from 10 years ago. We want to join hands with Ukraine and start from where we are now to improve the drone business.
Certainly. Now, the Test in Ukraine platform is this unique initiative offering real-time combat conditions for foreign defense companies to test their systems. What kinds of technologies do you think are the most in demand for testing right now? And how do you think companies balance the commercial opportunity versus the risks involved?
Yeah, I'll answer the second one. It's easy.
Yeah?
They see this as an incredible opportunity. You can build something and test it in America or wherever around the world. That means one thing. Build it and test it in a wartime situation, that means an entirely different thing. And you asked me kind of what the priorities or what is going to, I think, is next. I actually believe we're going to see a lot of work on counter-drone, anti-drone technologies, because we can't afford to keep shooting very, let me say it one more time, very expensive defensive missiles at cheap drones. We've got to figure out how to defend against cheap drones cheaply. And so I believe there'll be a lot of work that will be done over here, and that will accelerate the pace of change in counter-drone technology.
In terms of, we know this lesson very well, exactly what you just said. This drone incursion on the 10th of September with 19, 20 drones coming into Poland. Could you address the difficulty it is for the Air Forces to detect low-flying objects such as these and small objects?
So what we have not focused on much in the past, we are beginning to focus on now. And I'll use the term the density of our sensors, where our sensors are and how many of them there are. Years and years and years ago, people thought that when we put these two Aegis radars in Romania and Poland, we're good. Well, sorta. Those things can see low down close to them, but far away from them, they're not able to monitor all the way to the ground. And so where other sensors are, the density of drones in your country greatly increases the ability to defend your airspace.
Now, Western defense companies have an opportunity to test new weapons in Ukraine under those real battlefield conditions. How significant is this for the innovation cycles and in the defense industry, and could it change how new systems are developed in the future?
Well, we don't want wars in the future. So what we don't want is this to be a persistent opportunity. But we have a war now, and to be able to use that war to, as you said, shorten or improve the innovation cycle, that's really important. But once again, we don't want wars. We don't want this opportunity to present itself ad nauseum. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. And in terms of the types of weapons, I mean, now we're starting to see AI enter literally the battlefield, and we're starting to see unmanned systems. Does that mean that the future of warfare is going to take a very different course? Does that mean there'll be more casualties as a result of these types of weapons, or less?
So you asked a question that I want to answer theoretically. Theoretically, no, it's not going to change the nature of war. The nature of war is going to remain the same. This is just a different set of tools to be used in war, and therefore the character or the actions of the war will change, but the nature of war doesn't change. Hasn't changed since Clausewitz, Sun Tzu, Jomini, all of those guys wrote about it. It's just we have different sets of tools.
In terms of killing humans, I mean, war I interpret as killing humans, but once we start having drones on drones, does that take the human out of the equation somewhat?
Every drone, a human sends it, and for the FPV drones, the human flies it. You know, we used to not use the word drone. We call them autonomously piloted vehicles or non-piloted vehicles, whatever, to remind people that very few drones, I mean, all drones are programmed or aimed by a human. And then they fly off and try to hit their target. But there's humans in the loop still.
Still. That may change, though, in the future.
Well, wait a minute. So let me just ask you a question.
Well,
do you think there's ever going to be a time where a drone is just sitting on the runway and the drone all by itself decides to take off and fly and go kill something?
Well, apparently for what they're saying about these new AI systems, that they can automatically identify a target. Now it's up to the human to give the AI this permission, right?
Yeah, what I'm saying is there's always going to be humans in the loop. The degree of flexibility that the drone has after it takes off, that's what's going to continue to improve.
Okay, now scaling production, it remains one of Ukraine's biggest challenges, particularly for complex systems like cruise missiles. We see this Flamingo that's in development. What do you think are the main bottlenecks for Ukrainian forces when it comes to these types of weapons?
Time. The bottom line is the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian industries have proven to the world that they can build the most sophisticated weapons out there. But they're going to take time to grow the industry so they can create things at scale. They're building some really good weapons that go very deeply now, but they're small numbers because their industry is at war and it's under pressure.
And finally, looking ahead, if Ukraine succeeds in building robust, internationally integrated defense industry, what could that not mean, not just for Ukraine's survival, but also to balance defense here in Europe and the ability to share that?
So already, if we talk about a ground force, Ukraine's probably the second biggest and second most powerful army in NATO. If Ukraine ever is integrated into NATO, or even if it just becomes a partner of NATO, like an Australia or a New Zealand or something like that, they're going to bring immense capability to the Western alliance. And so we fail to recognize that, yes, they have a long way to go in their Air Force, and yes, they have a long way to go in their Navy, but their Navy has run Russia out of the northern Black Sea, and they don't have even one capital ship. This is the innovative power of Ukraine.
Absolutely. Well, General Breedlove, thank you so much for joining us here at the Warsaw Security Forum and on TVP World. We very much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's all the time we have on this interview here for Eastern Express. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. Russia is expanding its draft once again. President Vladimir Putin has ordered the conscription of 135,000 men by the end of 2025, the largest autumn intake in nearly a decade.
Moscow holds 2 conscription drives each year, and this false number is far above the recent average of around 127,000. It follows a spring draft that already pulled in 160,000 men, the highest since 2011. Officially, conscripts are expected to serve 1 year at military bases inside Russia, and the Kremlin insists they are not sent into combat. But Ukraine has repeatedly reported capturing conscripts on the battlefield, and even Putin himself admitted that some were deployed during the first months of the invasion. Beyond conscription, Russia has lured hundreds of thousands into signing military contracts with high salaries and bonuses, all while planning to expand its forces to 1.5 million by 2026. And with lawmakers now moving toward a year-round draft system, there is little sign Moscow's appetite for manpower will slow down.
In Turkmenistan, officials claim people don't need higher salaries or pensions. At least that's what the chairman of the Council of Elders told Parliament last weekend.
Yazmirat Atamiradov argued that Turkmens live well enough already, and that money earmarked for wage or pension increases should instead be spent on developing the country. He even insisted no other nation in the world provides such benefits to its citizens. But eyewitness accounts and independent experts tell a very different story. In one of the world's most closed states, people routinely struggle to afford food and medicine. For many pensioners, state benefits do not even cover basic living costs. So, while Ashgabat presents an image of prosperity, the reality is far more bleak. A population forced to make ends meet while officials tell them they should be grateful for what little they have.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.